So good afternoon. Warm welcome to Multiculturalism and Migration Observatory seminar. My name is Konrad Pędziwiatr. I'm coordinator of the observatory, and I will lead today's seminar with technical assistance of my colleagues and friends, Dobrosława, Wiktor-Mach, and Brzozowski. Jan and Dobrosława are those persons who are in particular responsible for muting all the participants joining the seminar and making sure that everything goes smoothly in terms of the communication during the seminar. We are recording all these seminars and then making them available through our YouTube channel, and we will also send information on our Facebook and Twitter account about the availability of this recording of this seminar. So all the non-speakers during this seminar, they all will be muted until Q&A. When they will have an opportunity to ask questions, they will be able to ask questions with their cameras or without them, or we will be able to ask their questions. You can address, you can write your questions during the webinar in the chat, either to me personally or to Dobrosława, Wiktor-Mach, or basically to everyone. And I'll read these questions to the speakers during the Q&A. We will, each of the speakers will have around 15 to 20 minutes for the presentation. Today's seminar is devoted to a fascinating subject of religions in migration processes, and we will be looking at the mostly situation in a pre-pandemic sort of era and also at the current situation. Religions have been playing a key role in migration process, both in this time pre-pandemic and at present. That is obviously very much shaped by forced immobility, and migrants are one of the groups that are particularly affected by this new novel situation. Religions are one of the elements of the cultural luggage that many migrants have been carrying with themselves while moving from their home countries to new destination countries. And in the times of crisis, religious networks have been particularly vital in providing not only spiritual and mental support, but also sometimes material assistance to migrants. Today's seminar will shed light on some of the implications of religion in different types of migration processes, from forced to voluntary ones, and in various parts of the world. It will strive to assess some of the major implications of these processes in the last months and years, and also try to relate this current situation to various communities. We have a group of distinguished scholars from Italy and Poland that will tackle this and other issues. And the plan was to start with Professor Maurizio Ambrosini, but he's got some problems with connecting. So he will join us hopefully later on. And we will start with Samuele Molli, who is professor at the Catholic University of the Sacred Heart in Milan. So now I'll pass the floor to Samuele. And Samuele, you have around 15 to 20 minutes for your presentation.
Perfect. Can you see my presentation, Konrad, and the people?
Not yet. You have to You have to share it.
Yes, I'm in this way.
Yes, yes. Now we can see that. Yeah.
Perfect. So, hello to everyone. Thanks to Konrad
Yeah.
to organize this invitation. I'm very glad to be here. So, in this talk, I will debate, I will present some of the findings related to my PhD research and my PhD project. In particular, I studied the intersection between religion, migration, and integration. And in particular, here you can find some research questions like the reasons and accounts on the basis of immigrants' religious participations. I focus on the ways in which religious communities, churches can influence the experience of migration. And finally, I focus on the ways in which participation can support of migrants. I think that the answers around these questions can represent a view to analyze the current situation, given that if we are able to understand how generally religious communities move on and work around this question, we can elaborate on the current situations. In particular, I was able to collect data on ethnic churches, which are religious communities established by Catholic immigrants, both in the city of Milan and also in London. I did a comparative studies. I would like to underline as typically when we debate around religious pluralism, we tend to think to Islamic communities, but there are many forms of religious pluralism. And in particular, in the city of Milan, like in London, today we can see different many churches established by migrants within the historical mainstream denominations like Catholicism. So it is not only a question of a Europe less Christian, but of a Christianity even less European. And finally, during my PhD research, I was able to collect 75 interviews with members, with religious responsibles, and I was able to collect ethnographic data on the church activities like religious and social events. So I think that the first point to debate is the role of space. Given that the possibility to have and the possibility to share a place is the main condition for building a communitarian experience, a communitarian ethnic context. And within the literature, typically we find two theoretical frameworks to approach the role of space. The first one is the aesthetics or poetics of space. So it relates to the architecture, the visible elements of religion. And the second one relates to the social, economic, and political implication embedded within these religious spaces. So in terms of aesthetics, I was able to observe that migrants bring and import in Milan and in London interesting religious items from other country. In this picture, for example, you can see a typical Latin American religious item that migrants bring with them during the migration process. And this symbol is the first crucial step to create a church, to create a religious community. Secondly, typically both in Milan and also in London, these items serve to create an ethnic belonging. Around such symbols, migrants reinvent and invent a diasporic identity where they can mutually recognize, where they can meet, where they can gather. And moreover, in this way, typically they transform local areas into transnational spaces. In Milan, for example, we can find marginal churches typically left empty by local people, spaces that are today less attended, and several cases totally abandoned by local people. But here, migrants create new urban hubs where they can regularly gather and meet, where they can practice rituals in their native language. So churches become a sort of space of freedom where they can set free their agency and where they can activate ties and relation, where they can develop mutual trust. And this is the next point. Even that here I would like to debate with you the issue of social capital creation in migration. In particular, I would like to focus on the role of religion in the social capital creation. As we know, within the classics of sociology, for example, Max Weber, we know that religion represents a typical platform where to develop trust among members, where to establish confidence among members. And during the fieldwork in Milan and London, I was able to identify 3 typical ways in which migrants establish and create social capital. In the first case, migrants within community, as clear, can find new ties, can create relation. Churches provide the possibility to create new ties beyond the only economic involvement, beyond labor market, and beyond the only case of family. So migrants look for new ties, new relation within this community. In the second case, migrants, as we know, typically already have relationship in the city, but the church, this space, provide the possibility to center this network where people can gather and reinforce their relationship. And this is, for example, a picture where we can see how people within their communities create and establish solidarity during the religious activities. And finally, there are another interesting way in which migrants create social capital. Indeed, I have the possibility to observe the formation of internal subgroups or small cells where migrants typically reinforce relation and develop various secular and religious activities like music events, dinners, and other several activities. Typically, religious scholars call this form of involvement congregationalism, and it represents a typical internal activism, given that migrants within their communities can act freely without external pressures. Now the question is, how does social capital develop and interact with the same experience of migration? Here, I show you an inductive taxonomy classification where I can show the different types of function that churches typically provide to members. In particular, on the left, yes, we can find common themes, common issues that I was able to collect during the interviews with members. On the right, we can find the function. So the forms of help that church typically can provide to members. In the first line, within the boxes, we find issues like loneliness, like the need of a new family and the sense of solitude. So church provides to members a space where migrants may answer that typically don't fit in everyday activities. So religion provides a peaceful space, different from ordinary life and ordinary obligations. In the second line, I often found issues and themes like the everyday stress linked to their jobs, the anxiety of living for a long period in a new and different social context. And I found issue like the tension linked to the mother country. As we know, migrants typically have part of relatives in their mother country, and these can create different expectation and also stress. So church serves as a space of resilience, a space where to soften the different form of stress. In this line, we can find issue like job exploitation, stigma, legal and political exclusion. And here the church provides a space of resistance in terms like, migrants are able to create new strategies in order to avoid political and legal exclusion. So they create tactics in order to face their needs. And resistance is different from resilience, which is a more passive concept. In the next line, we can find a different issue, given that migrants within their community tend to create a new image of themselves. In particular, within the small groups, they typically develop new abilities. They tend to establish new roles. And it is particularly significant because in this way they create a different form of social mobility, given that they can acquire new positions within a religious setting, different from everyday activities and everyday obligations. In the last line, we can find the last issue, and it relates to moral questions. It is quite complex because migrants often look for new moral compasses in order to face the moral disorientation embedded in the migration process. They can try to find moral compasses, and often this moral question creates a border between the community and the external society, and often this form of moral question create a border on the migrants. And yes, this moral process leads to also renegotiate their cultural tradition. In particular, they tend to create a border against activities which are usually associated to their mother country, like dangerous activities like alcohol. So the community churches try to create a border between among these different moral issues. In the next slide, I would like to show you another significant point. Because during the research, I have observed like migrants typically tend to promote social practices in order to help the other believers in particular to support the believers in their material needs. So we find not only spiritual needs, but also material needs. And I call this activism as informal welfare. Now the question is how to define this social activism, because typically within the literature, welfare is something of formal, like policy, like public or private institution, and formal rules that operate and organize services. In this case, in the case of religious communities, we don't have rules or regulation. And then during the fieldwork, I started to identify resources within the communities and then the social mechanism behind the production of these resources. So we can find different platforms of services. In the first case, churches over the time become an information hub where migrants can find information on local institution, and the churches become also informal agencies to have information on jobs and information in the housing, two fundamental elements in the migrants' experience. Often the churches I have attended sponsor fundraisings to collect financial resources, but for organizing social activities and often to help the believers in the case of material needs like food, like clothes. So these are significant charitable activities. Also in the case of health assistance for who have lost their job, for example. And within the churches, often believers tend to help each other also for the family supports, for example, to provide childcare to the people who work all the day or to give information on schools. We know that typically mothers and fathers are strongly involved in their jobs, and they look for supports in their churches in order to have informal forms of childcare. Another relevant activity is a sort of transnational welfare, because migrants in all the communities collect money and resources to send in their native country to support the creation of a new school, for example, or similar international activities. And it is important because this kind of transnational welfare create an international status to the local churches, because the church gain an transnational respectability for this kind of support. So to conclude, we can observe that religious community migration tend to transform in an alternative informal welfare to support the accommodation of members. And in this slide, I would like to discuss how these religious networks can work today. As I show, churches perform very well migrants' need, but now there are problems. In particular, churches are under stress. I collect information, and I can say that there are two reasons behind this stress. The first one is that clearly we have many requests from people, but at the same time, people have less resources to share within the community. So we have a spread between the request and the economic, the financial, the material possibility. So the solidarity in this moment is significantly challenged by the situation. At the same time, I can discuss with you, I can show you some interesting path. In particular, all the communities I know have activated new forms of religious activism. In particular, they give spiritual support in streaming. And this is a significant activity to help the members, given that churches are closed, and they try to do the best thanks to the social media and thanks to the this form of platform. And another interesting, in my personal opinion, activity concern the civic implications of religion. I collect a lot of information on how migrants are strongly involved in local volunteering activities. And most communities have collect money, have collect financial resources in order to support the local needs of, in many cities around Milan, migrants are helping the local people. For example, the elderly people, they help them in terms of food, and this is a significant activity, given that when we think to migrants, we tend to have often a passive idea. And here we can find information on how migrants have a strong agency also for the local, for the Italian needs. Finally, I would like to propose this reflection, given that the role of religion typically returns to the public attention in time of crisis. For example, if we think to the etymology, to the genealogy of the term welfare, we know that it was coined by an Anglican bishop at the beginning of last century. And he coined the term against the term welfare. So in a time of crisis, religion can represent a platform where to share practices, but also new ideas on how to face problems, on how to share resources in order to face this critical situation. And I think that the religious community established by migrants represent a significant space where these ideas, where these crucial ideas on welfare activities are working and are moving very well. So this is the last reflection that I would like to share with you. And so I can stop here.
Thank you very much, Samuel. Thank you very much for super interesting thoughts and insights about evidence from your fieldwork in Italy and the UK, and also about the thoughts about the spaces of support, religious spaces of support in the current situation, in the pandemic, and some deficit of solidarity. I hope it will be interesting to hear also the insiders, Marcin, Lisak, and Wojciech Sadłoń's view on that. But before I pass it to them, I would like to warmly welcome Professor Maurizio Ambrosini, who luckily managed to connect with us. Professor Ambrosini is a professor of sociology of migrations at the University of Milan at the Department of Social and Political Science. Professor Ambrosini, warm welcome, and now I pass the floor to you.
Hello to everyone. I'm very happy to have joined the group. Apologies for my delay. I'm in the Alps and my domestic connection broke. In general, it works very well, but not now. Thank you anyway for your patience, and I'm very happy to follow Samuele's presentation with some more general considerations about the relation between religion and immigration. You have already had some excellent examples by Samuele of what happens in religious communities established by migrants in receiving societies. I try now to develop this argument at a more general level. I don't know if I am able to share my slides.
You should be able, yes.
Yes. Are you seeing them?
Not yet.
In the migration field, I joined the conclusion by Samuele. Religions are recovering an important role in the field of migrations. We can distinguish three aspects. From outside, so from a secular point of view, minority religions can be seen alternatively as a resource or as a threat for social cohesion in receiving societies. From above, so from the point of view of established religious institutions in receiving societies, these mainstream institutions have become relevant actors in migration policies. They try to influence migration policies, as I will try to explain, mainly trying to protect migrants and to favor the integration of migrants into the receiving society. Samuele already developed the third aspect. From below, immigrants gather around their religious institutions, symbols, and belongings. It is a field in which migrants achieve protagonism, a possibility to become actors, even if it is much more difficult in other fields, in work, in politics, in the relations with the receiving societies. But in the religious field, immigrants are more able to achieve freedom and protagonism. So from above, I can rapidly say that restrictions at the borders are combined with conditions that hinder the access of irregular immigrants, in particular, to labor markets and social services. But these restrictions fuel the activism by alternative providers. The restrictions create an empty space, and this space is filled by someone else, by alternative providers. And in several countries, obviously in Italy, but also in Spain, in Germany, in the United States, Catholic institutions play a crucial role. And also the Protestant minority are very active. What they do, mainstream religious institutions are actors in the provision of services to immigrants, and also at the political level in the cultural and political defense of their rights. I can mention language schools. In many parishes in Italy, there is a language schools for migrants run by local volunteers. Health services for irregular migrants, possibilities of leisure and gathering, and information. Now support in regularization campaigns, as it has started again in Italy in these last few days. But it's also interesting to see what happens from below. Here, as Samuele already explained, religious institutions are a source of refuge, of respect, of resources. And I can add a couple of elements. They help migrants to redefine their identity. In a new country, they have to face crucial questions. Who am I? Why I follow this religion when the majority of people follow another religion or no religion at all? And second, religious institutions are a place of socialization, a place where they can meet, where they can gather with their compatriots, where they can share and display their cultural belongings. In general, beyond worship, on Sunday, migrants organize music, meals, entertainment. They try to establish their social life around their religious institutions. At the same time, they adapt their religious tradition to the new context. In the literature, this is called institutional isomorphism, because they follow the local trend in choosing Sunday, for instance, as the day of worship, in electing their ministers of worship, in developing activities for the youth or for families, or to have teaching of religion to the children. All activities that are not normally developed in many religions in their normal context. So we can conclude on this point saying that the religion is not only religion, but a complex and multifaceted social experience. I follow again Samuele summarizing why immigrants like to follow their own religious institutions. They try to preserve or sometimes to reinvent their cultural identity. They can find help and protection. They can find a safe harbor in an alien society, following Warner, a little piece of Zion in the midst of Babylon. But there is another interesting aspect. Why, in general, immigrants in the receiving society are integrated only in the lower tiers of the labor market? They are only partially integrated. They have no voice or very weak voice in the public realm. In their religious community, they can find leadership roles. They can become the head of the choir, or they're responsible of teaching religion to the children, or they're responsible of the budget, or they can achieve other relevant community roles. So they compensate a weak integration in the public space with a leadership role for many in their own community. And finally, they hope to pass their cultural heritage to their children through religion. This last point is much difficult in secular societies. It is probably recently and in Europe more difficult than in other times and other places, but immigrants try anyway to develop this kind of educational activity in their own communities. I would like only to mention a last point that is quite problematic in Italy, but I think also in other countries. The Italian Catholic Church is very active in general in protecting immigrants' rights and in offering services, as I said, to immigrant population. And they try to help, especially the weakest segments of the migrant population, asylum seekers, irregular immigrants. But on the other side, the reception of immigrants is a contentious aspect in the life of the Catholic Church, because the official discourse is not shared by all the believers, all the Italian believers, I mean. Many people volunteer in various services to immigrants, but other people, mainly simple churchgoers, have taken an adversarial attitude, and they support mainly anti-immigrant parties. They don't follow the Pope Francis, they don't follow the bishops in protecting immigrant rights, in developing activities in favor of immigrants. Another problem has arisen. I call it the issue of ecclesiastical citizenship. Catholic immigrants gather mainly in their own national chaplaincies, as in other times and in other countries. They like places where they can speak their own language, they can sing their own songs, where they can follow their particular devotions, and where they can develop leadership roles, as I said before. But at the same time, they are not included in pastoral councils and in activities of the mainstream Catholic Church. Rarely they are involved in Catholic associations, in local Catholic associations, or in local Catholic events, in congresses, or in other relevant activities of the local Catholic Church. Catholic immigrants are often better connected with the Catholic Church in their homeland than with the Catholic Church in their town or residence. So I conclude, it is necessary to distinguish different settings where the interactions between native and immigrant believers occur, seizing the tensions between them. The same commitment by Italian Catholics in the reception and the aid to migrants feeds forms of separation, builds invisible social borders. On one side, we find the people who help, the Italian Catholic volunteers, and on the other side, the needy. So they help, but they remain separate. And on the other side, the immigrants are passive in their relation with the Italian Catholic Church, while they are very active inside their own community. To recap, despite the commitment in favor of immigrants, the equality and integration among believers of different origin is yet a distant goal. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Ambrosini, for this very inspiring presentation. To others, just to let you know, Professor Ambrosini has sent me the presentation before, and we will be happy to, with the permission of the professor, to share share it afterwards. Yeah.
Very well.
Yeah. So just without, we'll have questions, Q&A afterwards. So now, without delay, I would like to pass it to Wojciech Sadłoń, who is the director of the Institute for Catholic Church Statistics, and he will be joined by his colleague Marcin Lisak, who is a senior researcher at the Institute for Catholic Church Statistics. So, gentlemen, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you very much for the possibility to be with you. We would like to share some basic findings concerning Polish migration to Ireland. Of course, it's not easy to describe the effect of the pandemic or the coronavirus to this migration to this Polish diaspora in Ireland, but we will try to do it. It's more the role of Marcin to present some suggestions more than results of the research. This what we have, what could be said very strict or real facts is the data on religiosity of Polish migration to Ireland. This research has been conducted in 2018 and also a little bit 2019. It's our project which we are still conducting, and there are no articles, no open access presentation which would present our data. So in fact, you are among the first, some of first who are able, who may see the results of our research. My short presentation is of course focused on a specific topic. I hope you see my screen now.
Yes, just press F5 so it's the full screen.
Okay. It's the presentation of the research focused on the issue which is very often called or labeled in the sociology of religion as individualization of religion. So I want to present religiosity of Polish migration in Ireland from this perspective. Individualization, what does it mean? How this individualization could be presented, this process of individualization of the religiosity of Polish migrants. I will skip some introductional issues which are not important and in fact quite obvious. I would only like to highlight that our focus on migration is more, I would say, complex and dynamic. So we don't want to observe only very simple and linear processes or dynamics, but we want to present migration as an aspect of identity formation. So identity, and more precisely religious identity. And this concept of religious identity is in the center of this presentation. And as we know, in the literature, there are some suggestions or even some theories which show that Polish citizens, or generally Polish Catholics, because as we know, great majority of Polish citizens are Catholics. So when they migrate, they become more individualized. Their religiosity is more individualized. And I would like to show what does it mean. So what does this individualization means? Is it really liberalization, or I would say detachment from religious norms, or so is it only this structural problem or more subjective problems? And my theoretical background is taken from Margaret Archer, and generally speaking, critical realism and her attitude towards this tension between individual and the collectivity, or between subjectivity and social structure, between experience and the culture, I would say, in this way. So in this perspective, migrants are subjects, and they have identity, and their identity is shaped. It's shaped also by migration. The important role in this identity formation plays reflexivity, and generally speaking, in this perspective, we may observe, or we may ask about so-called agency of migrants. Of course, my perspective is on religiosity and the role of religiosity in this phenomena, which we could call as agency. Our research includes quantitative data, so quantitative research, which was done using so-called random-driven sampling methodology, which is quasi-representative. Of course, it's a big topic to explain this method, and it's also another question: is it representative or not? So we based our research on some articles and presentations which claim that this random-driven sampling, if following strict rules, could be treated as at least quasi-representative. We also done qualitative research, so focus groups and personal interviews, in-depth interviews with Polish migrants. First, some basic research, some basic results. So of course, the migration, which was inaugurated in 2004. It's also very interesting that in Ireland there are in fact no Polish citizens who arrived to Ireland before Poland accessed European Union. Polish minority consists in it includes more than 100,000 people. It's about 3%. Most of them are young people. 89% is under 44 years old. So on average, they are nearly 41 years old. The proportion of males and females is nearly equal. I will now skip to another presentation, sorry, because it's more basic and more, you can see, I hope, or not. You can see now our chart or only the text?
We see the chart, yes.
Okay. Okay, so now some basic results of this research, just overview. This is a question concerning religious change. How these citizens, how these Polish migrants to Ireland define what's going on with their religiosity, how they declare. Has it become stronger while being in Ireland, or rather declined, or has not changed? Next chart concerns, I will move. Oh, it doesn't work, sorry. About religious practices, so attending Mass on Sunday. We have here comparison between Poland and Ireland. So how they define themselves. Of course, this data concerns one population, so Polish migrants to Ireland, but we ask them about religious practices in Ireland and before coming to Ireland, so in Poland. So we can see that there is all categories, generally there is a strong decline. We have also asked about, for example, language of religious service, which they prefer. So most of them prefer Polish, but sometimes English. And 1/3 only in Polish, prefer religious service only in Polish. Attachment to Polish pastoral service, or local Irish, Catholic Irish pastoral ministry, and so on. So we have no time for presenting, of course, all data. They include about 60 items. So I'm coming back to my presentation and to more theoretical elaboration of this data. So I tried to study Polish migrants, the dynamism of religious identity among Polish migrants, and I divide this group, this population of Polish migrants, into 3 groups. So first group is about 1/3 of all population, and includes people who declare that their religiosity is stable. So being in Ireland, they don't declare any change in religiosity, but in fact, their religiosity declines. So when we ask them more precisely, they say, yeah, in fact, we attend Mass less often, or we pray less often, and so on. But generally, at this declarative level, they say that we are stable in our religiosity. Second group includes Polish migrants who declare that they have experienced a decline in their religiosity. So they admit that our religiosity has declined. And in fact, when asked more precisely, we observe very strong decline in religious practices, and also in some attitudes, some aspects of attitude toward Catholicism and generally beliefs. And third group, third group is only about 7% are migrants who declare that their religiosity has experienced some kind of revival. So they declare that they have experienced a revival in their Catholic religiosity. And in fact, many aspects of their religiosity, when asked more precisely, confirm this tendency, this direction. So they go to the church more often, and they practice religiosity generally more often, and are more attached to the Catholicism. And now my question is how it relates to social agency. Of course, this concept of social agency is very, very wide, very broad. So in fact, I study it more practically, agency as social engagement, as social activity, and generally speaking, being involved within local communities or generally within the community. And in fact, we can observe 2 modes of change within concerning this social agency in terms of religiosity. So first mode of change in religious identity concerns both migrants who declare no degree of religious change in themselves, and these who affirm a decline in their religious identity. So this is a first group which binds these 2 first categories. So these who say that my religiosity is stable, and these who say that my religiosity has declined. In fact, in terms of agency, there are no big differences. So it's justified to study them as a one group. So in fact, they are affected by decline in their level of practicing and feeling attachment to their religion. They see moving to Ireland as a liberation from traditional Catholic structures. They move towards no religious or even atheistic attitudes, but practically speaking, become separate from Catholic organization and institutions. And we can see that this process of individualization or deinstitutionalization has already been started in Poland. So it's some kind of continuum. So it's not something really special or something really rising up when they migrate. And they find Irish culture, or even more precisely speaking, Catholic Church in Ireland, less restrictive, and Polish Catholicism much more normative and putting more pressure. Second mode of this emerging social agency concerns this small group of Polish migrants, about this 7%, who define themselves as experiencing, so they claim that experience some kind of religious revival. And this group is more often represented by women. They have more children. And it's also interesting that this group planned to stay for a relatively shorter period of time in Ireland. But they feel quite well integrated within Irish culture. About 70% prefer attending religious service in Polish rather than English. They are more likely to feel attached to both Polish and local Polish pastoral, Irish and local Polish pastoral centers, and so on. So generally speaking, it's interesting because in fact, they are better integrated. According to data, according to the declarations, they are better integrated within Irish social-cultural system, despite the fact they are much more religious. Religious also in terms of attachment to Catholic Church, to this Polish Catholic Church and Polish Catholic structures in Ireland. So they more often take part in local Irish elections. They more often participate in Irish local organizations. They are also more likely to include Irishmen and other nationalities in their social networks. And majority is engaged in social welfare activities for the benefit of migrants. So we can observe some kind of paradox. So they are much more, they identify much more with Polish Catholicism and this religiosity which they in fact inherited in Poland, but on the other hand, they are better integrated within Irish culture. So now I try to test some hypotheses statistically. I put into the model agency some variable which I call as agency, which includes participation in social organizations, either for migrants or just for Irish men, social activities, and local elections, participation in local elections. And I put also religiosity, defined as frequency of religious service attendance, frequency of private prayer, and so on. And what's important for me, this religiosity, I don't define as stable, but in this dynamic approach. So I observe, or I put into the model how religiosity has changed while being in Ireland. So I, in fact, put in the model that religious change in these aspects of practices, of declaring beliefs and so on, declared beliefs and so on. And here are some results. This is a very simple Pearson correlations. So we have here agency. So one is agency, and we can see that there are some correlations with generally speaking religiosity, but also partially with religious practices, prayer, religious self-identification, religious being generally defining as Catholic, and also defining that my religiosity has increased. Here I put some demographic variables to see also other the influence of other aspects of migration. But I also put it to some kind of regression models. I think it's not so important, but we can see some. Statistically, it's explained. Yeah, it exists such a correlation between this, what we can call as agency and religiosity. And now, conclusions. So my intention was to present that migration, generally speaking, is associated with some kind of decline of what we can call, following Archer, decline of routine action. So there is a trend, which we can call as individualization. But in fact, this trend is very complex, and it's not so easy. And if we observe, or if we study migrants from the perspective of identity, so in fact in this dynamic way and processual way, we can see that this deconstruction of traditional religiosity includes also some more complicated issues and processes. And Polish migrants confront new social environments of Irish culture, and their traditional Catholic values and practices undergo a process of adaptation and religious decline. And it could be called as individualization. But also there is something within this process. There is some kind of religious experience, or some kind of religious, some aspect of religiosity, which affects Polish migrants, I would say, the opposite way. So that migration reveals religious experience, which in fact helped in adaptation and in socialization within Irish culture. And this is the conclusion which, in my opinion, could be linked with the pandemic situation, and generally speaking, the role of religion within this crisis of coronavirus. So that within religiosity there is strong agential potential, and which could be used, or which could be elaborated for, especially in times of threats and some kind of need for social engagement and transgressing limits, or on some kind of, how to call it, limits, or even, better speaking, restrictions of pandemic situation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Wojciech. So I understand now Marcin continues along the same lines, or slightly develops it a little bit higher from more qualitative perspective.
Yes, thank you. Since Wojciech's presentation was rather quite developed, I will give only some remarks because I think that we are running out of time. So, regarding to those presentations about or coming from our Italian colleagues and from Wojciech, I would like to underline that we observe on the basis of our research conducted in Ireland that really social geography matters in questions like religion and culture and other social factors. What does it mean? I think there is a huge difference between some religiously homogeneous groups or quasi-homogeneous groups and others religion groups like those who are linked with other religious denomination and non-Christian religions and those believers coming from such emigrating countries like in the North Africa or to the Middle East. So we have been conducted some aspects of religiosity of Polish migrants living in Ireland. So does it mean we observe, of course, very many similarities between those religious groups? However, there is a quite visible, quite significant cultural distance between those nations, the Irish and the Polish. So anyway, that's very important also to examine, to do some research on believers of, in general, similar religious groups, because we observe probably quite different results. And what concerns our question, oh, sorry, I would like to present you some details, some conclusions. Can you see my slide just now? Yeah, that's fine, thank you. In the literature, we observe that there are two main approaches to examine the link, the nexus between religion and migration. So one option is to find or to consider the theologization or desecularization mode. So if people migrate from their home country, do they really have some significant impact for their identity and their religious situation, behavior is going to emerge or to be more coherent at the time of migration. On the other side, we have some alienating or secularization option or hypothesis, how those two aspects of religion and migration work together. Finally, some scientists find that there is another option which is quite visible after examination of the data. And this is in a strong correlation, in a strong link with those words and those presentation of Wojciech just before me. And that is the mode of individualization. For migrants, their social context, their cultural context has a very significant impact on their religious identity, and it becomes more and more individual. So sometimes it comes with some emerging of religious variables or religious factors for their lives. On the other side, it is quite in contrary to that. So we observed the demise of religion. However, almost every time that combination, that link provides some very individual result. When we reconsider that, we can also say that, in fact, we can consider that individualization is rather a part of a quite broad spectrum of secularization, or is more, maybe it's better to say it's a significant part of the institutionalization of religion. And those are my observation and my conclusions after considering our data. So in general, of course, we, how already Wojciech said, we conducted our research before the pandemic. But we observed at that time that for majority of Polish migrants, their religion is coming more privatized, and well, it flows towards some kind of private, very individualized spirituality. On that ground, we can consider also that there is an ongoing and very strong, or maybe even a very rapid process of deinstitutionalization of religion. So we can observe, of course, some religious phenomena among those migrants, but one can say that what we observe is believing without practicing, or with very less practicing, or without obeying the institutions. Well, we observe decline in the practices, and that decline is correlated to higher income, to higher educational level, and longer staying in Ireland. So it is quite evident, at least for me, that if we consider how it works, religion and migration, for the case of Polish immigrants in Ireland, we can answer that religion produce neither bridges nor barriers for integration, for other social actions. So in general, religion becomes more irrelevant for migrants. So if we consider that, we can also hypothesize that with the coming of the pandemic, we will observe a further and stronger deinstitutionalization of religion, and what comes with that in hand. All regular or normal religion institutions like Catholic Church or Catholicism in general, which is the most common religious denomination for Ireland and for Poland, becomes less relevant for all believers, and this kind of institutional religion is in the demise. It weakens with the pandemic, of course, for the sure reasons of the social isolation, social distancing, and so on. And last, my remark concerns some new research. I've just started it in the end of the last year. I would like, my plan is to examine religiosity of Ukrainian migrants in Poland. But of course, because of that state of pandemic, the research was just stopped. I hope that it is just for a while. But what I consider after some focus group interviews, I see that the migration of Ukrainian work-orientated people to Poland is first of all run by those social and economic factors. So for their religious life, they follow the rule, so-called rule, God can wait, and religion can wait for them as a quest until they return home to home country, and realistically, if people migrate from not very culturally different societies to their neighbor countries or to other countries, but within the European Union, I can observe that in general, like for the majority of Europeans, religion and especially institutional religion becomes very or more, at least, irrelevant for their social agency or for their social capital or for other aspects of social behavior. It is quite interesting that state and those factors we observe with the coming and this battle against the pandemic around the world and especially in Europe. So I think it's a high time of very radical, another one probably, religious transformation in particular within the European societies. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marcin, for your reflections and thoughts. I found it, I'll open Q&A in a minute, so please write your questions in the chat, or you'll have a chance to just ask these questions personally. Also, speakers can ask questions to themselves. So you can also use this opportunity. One of the thoughts I had while listening to Wojciech and Marcin was that that actually you are first you are presenting above all in your research you're concentrating on the transformations of religiosity, and I had an impression that I really haven't heard at what is religiosity that you've been how do you define religiosity? This is a question especially to Wojciech, and I had the impression that Wojciech was especially trying to put forward an idea that in spite of the decline of religiosity, the religiosity basically transforms, but stays there, which is very much in line with the literature, which says that basically we are not so much towards the secularization, but rather towards new forms of religiosity. Also in the times of pandemic, as Samuele nicely presented it, the new, or Pope suggested the new forms of practicing also religion through online, through virtualism and new platforms. So I was wondering what is the point, especially with Marcin's pretty strong point. I had impression at least that making really a point about the decline, and more emphasis was in his argumentation on the element of decline. In general, I had impression that and I'm very happy actually that this seminar is constructed in such a way, because what we have here, obviously we have two voices. We have voices from two countries above all. Obviously Samuele's research dealt with UK, but above all we have very strong sort of Italian research into migration in religion in migration processes, that more talks about the functions of religion and what role religion plays, and less so on the transformations of religiosity. And I have I imagine it has to do also with the fact that this is a dialogue of different perspectives, different country perspectives, but also probably I imagine it has to do with the perspective of researchers. I'm not sure what is the Samuele's position, I don't know, but I imagine Maurizio's research, as my research on Islam, is a little bit an academic who is outsider. I wonder to what extent your research into religiosity in the process of migration has to do with the fact that you are insiders as being the members of the clergy. So I wondered whether this has anything to do with your perspective, and how this perspective, it's a very big question obviously, but how this changes the perspective of looking at religion in migration processes. And the last point would be about the role of the church towards especially forced migrants. This is a very interesting case that I've been researching, and Maurizio Ambrosini is one of the most important scholars of forced migration. And one of the interesting comparisons that we can see is the different approach of the Catholic Church in Italy and in Poland towards forced migration. And I would like to have your views on this, Maurizio. How do you see this situation? And if you could say a little bit about this particular type of migrants and the attitude of the established church to forced migrants. And so if you could think about these questions, and then I would like to pass it to Dobrosława Dobrosława Wiktor-Mach, who has also a question, and anybody else could just say on chat who wants to ask questions. So we will gather more questions and give you the possibility to answer. Okay, Dobrosława? Dobrosława is not switching on her mic. Oh yes, she is now, okay. So Dobrusia wanted to ask questions. You have to switch on your mic as well.
Okay.
Yes, now we can hear you.
I also want to thank a lot. I want to thank everyone for the wonderful presentations. I think we've got really great cases, both from Italy and from Ireland, which really shed a light on various aspects of migration and religion and religiosity and religious communities. First of all, I would like to ask the question which is asked by Agnieszka Legut to Professor Ambrosini and Samuele. I will also put the question on the chat, so you can also take a look at this. So the question is as follows. Taken the discrepancy between of the Italian Catholic Church in pro-immigrants work and the presence of anti-sentiment among the believers, I'd be very interested to know if the institution has ever launched some pro-immigrant advocacy campaign that would be directed at Italian society in large, or specifically at Italian Catholics. I mean outside the regular religious formations, etc. So that would be the question. If I can also add my question to that, that question would be to Wojciech Sadłoń. What about religious switching, like switching affiliations? Have you come across such cases during your research that some of those Catholic immigrants who come from Poland, they just find, let's say, new kinds of communities in other religious or probably other Christian communities, let's say Protestant communities? As we know that Protestant communities are very, very active nowadays, like globally, especially in targeting new immigrants who come and who look for some groups to stay with. Often the Protestant network strategy is just to target specifically this group. And also they often label themselves Christian, so just not to discourage people from Catholic background. So they promote that they are not really Protestant, but that they are Christian, let's say above the sectarian tensions and affiliations, so that Catholics may also feel more comfortable with this. I have no idea how this is in Ireland. So if you have any information, I would be also interested in finding out how it is in the case you have researched. So for the moment, those two questions.
Who would like to start? Professor
I try to answer. First of all, I react to your comment, Konrad, very interesting, thank you. What is Catholic Church? The Catholic Church is an interesting question in recent times. I mean, probably the issue of migration and asylum has highlighted the fragmentation, the pluralization of the Catholic Church. I'm not an expert of sociology of religion in itself, but I think that we are assisting at a Protestantization of the Catholic Church. Believers and also parish priests and some bishops tend to give their own version of Catholicism, and they don't follow necessarily the official vision given by the Pope of the Conference of Italian Bishops. So it is evident that the issue of migration and asylum is dividing, is fragmenting the Catholic Church, and it meets different levels of reception and of acceptance by the priest, the clergy itself, and by the believers, the common believers. I can say in a few words that going down in the structure of the Catholic Church, there is less consent towards the Pope and the official vision. So passing from the Pope to the bishops, from the bishops to the normal the clergy, to the normal clergy, to the Catholic engaged, and then to the simple believers or the church attendants, there is less consent towards the official message of reception of love towards the strangers. And for what regards the interesting question of Professor Dobrosława, I could say the Catholic Church in general feels the problem to reach a larger audience. It has invested efforts and also resources to develop a TV network, radio stations, and cultural activities. But I think that the most effective campaign is the words of the Pope. The Pope is the main messenger of the acceptance of immigrants. For other aspects, I think it is interesting to observe what happens from below. So at the level of associations, of social networks, parish groups, there are many groups of volunteers, of Catholic people engaged, who try to organize initiatives, interfaith initiatives, for instance, or cultural initiatives that try to reach a larger audience, or activities in the schools, for instance. So there are these two sides. From above, the Pope, the bishops try to exerce a cultural influence in the society in favor of immigrants and asylum. And from the other side, there are, in effect, many local groups in a polarized political scenario, local groups who try on their side to develop many kinds of initiatives, of publications, for instance, booklets, journals, messages on social networks in favor of the acceptance of migrants. But both sides have problems to reach a larger audience, the large public, the public opinion, and the simple church attenders. The last group is more sensitive to what they see on TV or they receive by other social networks than from the efforts by the Catholic Church in its various components to influence their vision. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maurizio. Would you like to add something, Samuele, to this? You need to switch on your mic. You need to switch on your mic.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
No, I would like to say that within the literature we find different findings about the role of religion in migration, and religion can change during migration process. So I I presented a literative study, 4 or 5 acting churches, and my intention was to show you how religion can serve as a social activity, how it can provide welfare activities, because I think that during this critical period, churches can try to support their members. But I know that in general, so religions is something that can change during the process of migration. And during my fieldwork, I had the possibility to collect data on this process. In particular, at the beginning, migrants need supports, helps, and welfare activities. Then they look for different forms of support, in particular during the family reunifications. They try to approach the church in different ways in order to have a context where experience activities where they children. And so in the course of time, I know that religion can change, and in my personal opinion, is interesting to study this longitudinal approach to the church. And so, but yes, I just presented how communities can provide supports, can provide social capital, which is an important perspective on religion and migration from my point of view. And in my personal opinion, it would be interesting study during this period, because a crisis typically can produce changes in the approach. And I think that it would be interesting study how religion can move on streaming, can move on social media, and at the same time how communities can share ideas and services in order to support migrants during this critical period. I mean, most of migrants are involved in essential activities and then are working a lot in this period, but another part are stuck in this moment. So the church can provide a pivot for these persons. So I propose a sociological perspective, but I know that from the point of view of religious studies, there are interesting questions like individualization, like the relation with the local people, with the local churches. I mean, there are different paths of research.
Thank you very much, Samuel. I think the presentations they very nicely complemented each other. So the perspective of the Italian perspective of outsiders, I think very nicely in a way was complemented by Wojciech and Marcin. So when I meant this idea of being also different research stand, that's I think what enriches the research on religion, being an insider and having the insider's perspective also taken into account. So Wojciech, Marcin, if you could respond to some of the comments, questions that were raised.
I will start, if Marcin lets me do it. Okay, Konrad, your question is of course crucial, and I would say your question concerning religiosity is religious. So it's so basic that it's to answer what is religion or what is religiosity is of course the task for all sociologists of religion. My intention was to include the concept of religiosity, which I labeled as religious identity, which in fact is an attempt to study religiosity, or generally speaking, religion, in a little bit interactionist perspective. And this critical realist perspective, which I mentioned, in fact, is parallel or is very near to interactionist. But it includes also more sophisticated terms, concepts, and in my opinion, what is my dream, I would say, is in fact to develop some kind of personalistic perspective on religiosity. And of course, this is only a short presentation and a short, even statistical analysis. So in fact, there is no much space for it. So this, what I have done in this article, is to present some kind of, I would say, practical aspects of religiosity or of this religious identity. So at the beginning, the relationship to tradition, to religious culture, to religious structures. So there are items in our research, there are items concerning religious affiliation, relationship to the parish, religious practices, this well-known in the literature dimensions of religiosity. So, but rather pragmatic, so rather very factual, I would say, or even positivistic. But on the other hand, we also included some kind of, I would say, experiential aspects. This were included more in this qualitative data. So some kind of also emotional attitude, some kind of experience, religious experience. And yeah, and my dream would be to bind these two aspects and to unite them in some kind of concept of religious identity, which is processual, which is dynamic, which is also rooted in generally in personal identity. So religiosity is not a part, something apart of being human or being a person, but it's a part of it. So it's some kind of aspect of personal and social identity. And second question concerning religious switching. Yeah, it's an interesting topic. I have not studied this issue. Maybe Marcin could say something about his personal research, but I have not included it with this question. I only remember Jana Krotofil's book, who studied also a little bit this case in Great Britain when Polish Catholics become even Muslims. So move to some Muslim communities and in fact experience religion within non-Catholic communities. I think also not only Muslim, but also I think Protestant, as I remember her book.
Marcin, would you like to add something?
Yes. So, concerning that last question about shifting religious denomination, the religious profile of the Irish society is not very broad on the basis of religious denomination or in general religious affiliation. So in general, we didn't find very spectacular or very significant data for any kind of religious shifting. The other religious groups, except non-believers, are very small, and the most part of this new and quite lively Protestant Christian denominations, which is linked to Pentecostal Christianity, they are not very active in Ireland. The biggest denomination is an Anglican one. in the country, but well, I conducted some, how to say, specialists interviews with the church leaders, but there are very few Polish migrants who swap to any kind of Protestant, according to my knowledge, at least, to other Christian and in particular Protestant denominations. And what concern the religiosity? Well, in the realm of sociology of religion, we have from the beginning, and I think for the future also, the ongoing debate about the definitions, and we have this part of functional and the other substantial definitions of religion. So, of course, the question about religiosity is very crucial, but, well, it comes to some defining the problems and the realm of religion. It is a bit like putting the question, what comes first, egg or chicken? So both levels are important, and well, religiosity is more linked to institutional religion or traditional religious identities or regular religious identities. And well, when we examine our data, so of course, maybe in different ways, but Wojciech and I, we are going towards this quest of individualization, which is quite similar to the shifting from, in general, from researching religion towards spirituality. So in that sense, that spirituality is more individualist, more subjective. And I think with this coming of worldwide effects of the pandemic, we should also reconsider our basic theorems, theories and hypotheses towards or following that swap from religion or religiosity to more individual, more hybrid spirituality of the individuals, even they belong to such traditions like nation and national culture, or some kind of national cultural religion even. So also what we actually discover is that even though we have very strong similarities in social history between Ireland and Poland, and between Irish Catholicism theoretically and Polish Catholicism, they are quite different. I mean, this particular cultural implementation of Catholicism in Poland and in Ireland, they are quite different. So it is another interesting point or starting point for another further analysis, which is, in my opinion, in fact, more correlated to the concept of spirituality.
Thank you very much, Marcin, for your thoughts. I have many more questions that I would like to continue with you, but I understand the time limits, and it's almost 3 o'clock now. I know that Professor Ambrosini has some obligations, and all of us have our obligations. So we'll need to put these questions to the future and hopefully see you in Krakow as it was originally planned. Marcin and Wojciech were supposed to come to give a live presentation at our seminar, but unfortunately due to pandemic, we had to change the plans, but the plans, I believe, changed beautifully because we could only extend the planned seminar with Marcin and Wojciech to invite our Italian friends. And thank you very much, Agnieszka Legur, who is also here. She's the person who introduced me to Maurizio Ambrosini, and through her, I was able to contact Maurizio. And so thank you very much, Maurizio, for your presence today, and also many thanks to Jan Brzozowski for letting people in and out. So once again, thank you very much for today's thoughts and presentations. If anybody wants presentation of Samuel or Maurizio, I have their permission to share them, so just email me. And if Wojciech and Marcin want to share as well, and please send the text or presentation that you are presenting, and I'll also share to anybody who is interested. So thank you very much once again for being with us today, for accepting the invitation, and we will and hopefully we'll meet up shortly. Thank you very much.
Thank you.